The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jennifer Honacki with MannaPro. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening tonight to attend our webinar, which we're hosting with our partners and friends at Grit Magazine, Keys to a Healthy and Productive Flock, focusing, of course, on chicks. We're so thrilled to have everyone with us, and I want to just spend a couple minutes before we start the actual presentation going up over a couple of details. First of all, as you may have noticed when you entered the webinar, everyone was entered in what we call listen-only mode, which means that your phone or speakers or microphone have been muted. The reason for that is not because we don't want to hear from our participants. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we have hundreds of people actually logged on to the webinar. And if we were to pick up all of the background noise from everyone's individual location with dogs barking, kids crying, anything that could be going on there, it would be very disruptive and no one would have a really good experience. So that is why we do that. We definitely want to hear your questions. Thank you very much to those of you who have sent questions over the last several days to us. Our presenters have done their very best to incorporate as many of those questions and the answers to those questions into their presentations. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation, you'll just simply enter them, type them into the question area on your GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar dashboard. As I mentioned, we have a lot of people, and we're anticipating a lot of questions. We want to be sensitive to everyone's time, so we're going to be grouping the questions together throughout the webinar. We'll handle questions at the end of the presentation, and we will be tonight answering what we see as the most common or frequently asked questions from our participants. What we will also commit to is when we do run out of time, we will send an email out to everyone who participated tonight with answers to other questions that we weren't able to get to tonight. So we do intend to answer every question. Again, depending on how many we get, we may not want to be able to do that all tonight, just being sensitive to everyone's schedule. In addition, as you're listening tonight, if there's something that you missed or you want to go back or you want to share with someone else that you know who raises chickens, we are recording this webinar and we will have it online at MannaPro.com later this week. Okay? And Monday of next week at the latest. Okay? I've shown the agenda here. I won't go through it, but you can see we have a lot of topics to cover. We're hoping that everyone will be able to learn quite a bit tonight. We'll go through all of these topics, and then while our presenters are preparing answers to questions, we will have some attendance prizes to give out towards the end of the webinar, and then at the very end we'll handle all the questions that we can. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves to you, starting with Rob McCoy.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Just a little bit in the way of background. I've been with MannaPro for 13 years, and I lead the nutrition and quality assurance efforts here for the company. I'm originally from Kansas. I did my undergraduate work at Kansas State. I'm kind of sensitive to that now. We did get put out of the NCAA tournament just recently after some poor play in one particular game. But anyway, I did my undergraduate work in animal science at Kansas State, and then did a master's also at Kansas State in the Department of Grain Science, where I focused on feed manufacture, and actually did some growth assays with broiler chicks, so I have the experience that way, and then completed my formal education with a Ph.D. in ruminant nutrition from the University of Nebraska. I'll be covering the second segment tonight, so now I'd like to turn it over to my good friend Hank Will with Grit to let you to tell you all a little bit more about himself, and then to kick off the program.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rob and Jennifer. Excuse me, and thanks for the invitation to actually be here tonight. Welcome, folks. My name is Hank Will. I'm the editor of Grit Magazine. And my formal background is really in academia and agriculture. I was born to a nursery family in Bismarck, North Dakota, and wound up getting undergraduate and advanced degrees at the University of Chicago. I was really interested in plants, as you might imagine, from the nursery experience, and really got into the sort of genetics and the molecular biology of how some plants do what it is that they do. But at the same time, I was always fascinated with animals, and I had relatives, with large cattle herds, and I was just totally fascinated with poultry, especially when we went to the Minnesota State Fair over from Bismarck, which was quite a trek for a kid. And in the course of my career, I've been a college professor. I've always farmed on the side, and some of my experience includes raising thousands of free-range, direct-marketed broilers, and managing laying flocks that number in the hundreds. I've also raised semi-commercially turkeys and had a small goose project somewhere back there. I love poultry. I love chickens, and I can't imagine a life without them. I currently live in rural Osage County, Kansas, and I share some ground with a very awesome person and a mixed flock of chickens and turkeys and a number of highland cattle and some Katahdin sheep and mulefoot pigs. And Jennifer, am I supposed to just start?
Well, actually, yes, except we've had one question come in asking what type of truck you're sitting in the picture.
That's a 1964 International Harvester 1200 four-wheel drive.
Right.
I'm an IH guy through and through, although I do have well, it's actually my fiance's 69 GMC, or I'm sorry, Chevrolet pickup truck, but I believe in venerable old equipment.
There we go. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, yes. Just kick us off then.
All right, so many folks, they hear a lot about chickens and the chicken movement, and I think it's kind of fun to consider why you might keep chickens. Certainly for an impassioned chicken keeper like me, it's fun to go through it. And I think you'll notice with me in general, I tend to do things that I think are fun, and I think that chicken keeping is really fun. I find chickens to be incredibly entertaining and relaxing, even when I'm raising large quantities of them, for direct market or whatnot. There's all kinds of really interesting behaviors, all kinds of just all kinds of different colors and feather patterns and whatnot that continue to fascinate me or that continue to fascinate me today with regard to chickens. In fact, on our main chicken coop, I should really say chicken run, it's about an acre in size at my farm. We've got Adirondack chairs sort of set around the perimeter, and literally a way to unwind is to sit and watch the chickens peck, certainly for me. So that's one reason I think is for fun, and I think any project should have a certain amount of fun in it, or you might wind up questioning why you're doing it. I think also that raising chickens is a great education opportunity. Gives you a chance to learn about animal life cycles yourselves, and certainly to teach your children or other family members. You can reinforce, with family members where food actually comes from, other than at the drive-through window or at the grocery store. And I think that's really important, in this day and age, to actually go out in the morning and hunt down a chicken nest and pull an egg out of it. It's fairly magical. And I think another opportunity with education in chickens is to teach teach people responsibility, especially young folks, some responsibility through what I would call effective husbandry. If you take on a chicken project, you've got a lot of animals that are depending on you for everything from nutrition to protection to effective water supply. And if you drop the ball, there's a good chance that they'll die. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn to actually take care of something outside or in addition to themselves. Food safety is kind of a topic that's on folks' minds these days. If you raise your own flock, excuse me, you'll be able to know directly what went into the eggs and or the meat if you choose to eat some of the chickens. You know what went into them, and at the same time, you'll know how those foodstuffs, the animals that supplied those foodstuffs were processed and treated and whatnot. And I'm not making any judgment call there other than that you'll know. You'll know how things were handled. Chickens are awesome if you're a gardener. They're really effective at recycling lawn clippings and other vegetable waste, and in the process creating fertilizer for you. I actually like to use the chickens to help me break down old hay and straw before I apply it to the garden directly or to the compost pile. They have a great, wonderful scratching behavior where they'll pretty much break up, clods of hard cattle or donkey manure, and again, any sort of dried green material like straw, they'll shred it for you. And then gardens are awesome to turn loose in the. Chickens are awesome to turn loose in the garden in the fall. I basically surround my garden with a portable electric net fence and put a number of hens in, and they'll basically scratch. They'll forage for all the remaining fruit and or vegetables, eat insects and the like. And that leads on to my last sort of bullet here for pest control. Chickens are absolutely heck on all kinds of beetles and bugs. There's a saying about chickens on a June bug, and it's true. They absolutely will hover or hang around under lights where the June bugs will congregate at night and have a grand time picking them off. They're also good at foraging for ticks, but believe it or not, chickens, especially chickens that are used to ranging, will go after snakes. They're not, perhaps they're not the best at a 6-foot-long bull snake, but certainly some of the smaller snakes. And I frankly like snakes myself, but chickens will help chase them away. And the mice. Mice are a delicacy for the laying flock. We could go to the next slide, I think. So I think if you're convinced that you should keep chickens, then you have to sort of ask the question, the more practical question, can you keep chickens? And there are a lot of things to think about here. First, you need some space, and I'll give you some numbers for square footages and stuff like that. What I want you to always think about when you hear statistics or measurements or values, that there's always some give and take. Certain dimensions that you might hear are based maybe on an average size hen. If you're looking at a very large breed, like say black Australorps or something like that, you might want to give them more space. If you're looking at white leghorns, you might consider that you can get away with less space. But you should count on roughly 2 square feet of floor space per hen in the chicken coop, or what I'd call really the chicken house. And maybe we could make some definitions here. Coop is used synonymously with house, and the coop, and if you're going to use it synonymously with the house, then you need to consider that there also needs to be an outdoor run. So I think for the purposes of this webinar, I'll use house and coop synonymously, and then the run would be maybe the fenced-in area, the additional fenced-in area that they would have space to roam about in. So you'd need roughly 2 square feet of floor space per hen in the house or the coop. You need about 10 square feet of outdoor run per bird, and this is based on a fairly large breed, a medium-framed to large-framed bird. You should also offer about a foot of perch length per bird inside the coop. The chickens like to roost at night on perches, and it helps immensely or immeasurably with manure management if you do give them good perches. So you need to think about the space. You need to think about, I'm going out of order here, sorry. You need to think about time. Do you have the time to devote to rearing a brood of chicks? That'll be a little bit more time-consuming probably than looking after a set of mature hens. But the time commitment would include several times a day, at least twice a day, checks, routine feeding and watering, routine bedding management. You need to freshen up their bedding, whether you use wood chips or newspaper or what have you. You need to change their water daily. The clean water is really important for these birds. And then every now and again, you need to just bite the bullet and thoroughly clean out their chicken coop, the coop. And when you do that, you'll really feel some pride, I think, in the fact that you're giving these birds, a good life. But for me, just to give you an idea of the time in general, I probably spend about 20 minutes on the birds every day as part of my daily chore routine. And yes, I have somebody covering me tonight since I'm still at the office. All right, then you need to think about expenses. You definitely want to know for sure that you can afford, suitable facilities. They don't have to be super fancy or anything like that. And you can spend virtually nothing on a coop and a run if you can use recycled materials. And I know folks that have spent thousands, literally, on very fancy chicken houses and state-of-the-art fencing and whatnot. So I think there's quite a range there, but you'll need to shell out something probably for facilities. But more importantly, I think is you need to ask yourself the question: can you afford to feed them? And I did some calculating again on a medium-framed hen. If you had 10 medium-framed hens, under at least average conditions, they might eat 50 pounds of feed a month. And the 50 pounds of, if it was a complete chicken ration, would run you right around $12 right now. At least that's what it is at my local farm store. So you have to ask yourself the question, is $1 to $2 per month per bird for feed doable? And, for 4 or 5 birds, that might not be a problem, but you can imagine how quickly it escalates if you, succumb to the temptation to order, 50 or 60 birds at a shot. All right, then you need to actually also consider health, some health aspects, and I think what I really want to get across here is think of your own health. We'll talk about bird health later, but you want, before you embark on a chicken project, I think you really need to ask yourself the question: is it practical in your household or in your yard? Is anybody allergic to chickens in any way, shape, or form? And are the people who are the most likely to look after the birds able to do the physical work of maintaining them? And I think probably the toughest piece to the physical work is going to be handling up to 50-pound sacks of feed. You can often buy feed in smaller quantities than that, but it's fairly standard to handle 50-pound bags. And a 5-pound or a 5-gallon waterer, when it's full, can weigh right around 40 to 45 pounds as well. So you just want to, for the best success, the best likelihood for success, you want to know that all of that's part of the package. And then finally, excuse me, especially if you live in town, whether it's a small town that's surrounded by countryside or a larger suburban or urban area, you want to know, you want to at least know whether you can legally keep chickens or not. So you should check your zoning laws. It's sometimes difficult, sometimes it's murky. A lot of municipalities have rules that relate to livestock. Some people define, or some places define livestock, some don't. Chickens and other poultry are often not considered to be livestock, but in the interpretation of the law, a lot of times they are. Some municipalities have laws that specifically relate to chickens. And it's not always really easy to to discover that information, I think you should start with a call to your city hall, or there are a couple of websites, and I actually can't think of a name of the one right now.
The one we were talking about the other day was called municodes.com.
Yeah, Municodes, M-U-N, yeah, yeah, MUNICODES.com. If you dig around on that website, you can at least get pointed in the right direction for discovering whether or not there's a poultry law in your general vicinity. If the initial answer is no, a lot of times it pays to ask a few other people, because sometimes folks just assume that the answer is no and they don't really know if it's no. So don't necessarily take the first no as the final answer. And then I think you should, if you're really passionate about it, you should consider trying to change the law. A lot of cities, such as Madison, Wisconsin, and other places, of folks of grassroots movements have managed to, make it legal to keep at least 3 hens or so in the backyard for egg production or for pets. And I think gentle pressure, gentle, consistent pressure, and eventually backyard chickens will be as popular as backyard gardens. We can go next. Nice. So a little bit about chicken keeping etiquette, and I again would say that this would pertain especially to folks in town or anywhere where your coop is going to be readily visible. I would say definitely to at least consider the visual aesthetics. Coops and runs don't need to be beautiful, but you'll have a lot happier neighbors if you don't create an eyesore. And a lot of times, happy neighbors is all it takes to be able to keep chickens, as opposed to have a code violations officer knocking on your door. So you should consider using attractive materials for fencing and housing. Whatever that means, you'd have to use your own judgment on that, I think. And I think you should also, work toward installing the birds' facilities, coops and runs, into the landscaping or landscape around them. Your chickens will appreciate it because they like to have shade and shrubbery and whatnot to hide in. You've also really got to keep the coop clean. This is really important for the birds themselves. But if you keep your coop clean, it'll keep the smells down, and that will keep the flies down. That'll help reduce disease. It's more humane for the birds. You'll work out a steady process for moving the manure from the coop and the run to the compost heap and ultimately to the garden. And again, it'll keep your neighbors much happier. Rules about roosters. Again, this is just sort of a common courtesy thing. Roosters crow, and they crow pretty much whenever they feel like it. A lot of times it's at 2:30 to 4:30 in the morning. And crowing in town especially can be pretty annoying. In many cities that allow hens, where there are some renegade roosters in residence, that the rooster noise ranks higher than attracting rats for neighborhoods to want to ban chickens altogether. So again, I think if you're in town and you want to enjoy the privilege of keeping chickens, try to keep those roosters at bay. And then finally, you don't want to feed the rats. Another huge urban complaint about chickens is that they draw rats. The fact of the matter is, chickens don't draw rats, but chicken feed makes awesome rat feed. So you need to keep the feeding area neat and clean, and you need to store the feed in rat-proof containers, and you need to clean up the spills. If you routinely dump even an eighth of a scoop or a tenth of a scoop of pellets or crumbles on your way to the feeder, you're feeding rats, and you're also feeding often nuisance wild birds. So I think apply a little common sense and you're good to go. All right, so now let's move on to, I've got you really convinced that you're going to do this, and you can do it. You need to get yourself familiar with all kinds of resources. I love to read, and I love to study websites. So I think a couple of places where you might look for good information. At Grit, we just published a book. We call it a bookazine because it's in the format of a magazine called The Guide to Backyard Chickens. That's a great resource for everything from receiving day-old chicks and brooding them to hatching fertile eggs on your own, to maintaining a flock for egg production or even for meat production. There are also a bunch of books that are published by the Story Publishing. That's S-T-O-R-E-Y. They have a number of chicken guides and whatnot. You can find those virtually anywhere. And there are a number of really good websites that I enjoy. CommunityChickens.com. It's an excellent resource for chicken blogs and firsthand reports on raising chickens and various articles. MyPetChicken, .com. It's another just wonderful resource for just about everything how-to about chickens. You can also source supplies there, and there's just gobs of expert advice that's available through that website. Backyardchickens.com. It's one of the most robust chicken websites. It's a great resource that includes chat and forums, so you can get next to people that are asking and asking the same questions that you are, and connect with folks who are willing and able to answer them. All kinds of wonderful question and answer that goes on there, in addition to the bulk of the standard kind of chicken keeping information. And then urbanchickens.net is a really fun website that's full of philosophy and practicalities for keeping chickens in the city. And even as a country boy, I really enjoy the concept of folks putting together backyard flocks in the suburbs and in town. I think it's a wonderful addition. We can go to the next slide. All right, so you decided you're going to go ahead and do it. You need to sort of make ready. And my assumption is that you're going to source day-old or relatively young chicks. Day-old or 2-day-old would come in the mail. You might get week-old chicks at your local farm store, depending on how long they've been in the brooders there. So one of the first sort of facilities that you need to rear chicks is called a brooder. A brooder is really just a sort of safe container in which you can install some sort of a heater, typically a heat lamp, with a 250-watt bulb. Actually, a 250-watt bulb will handle up to 80 chicks. You could get away with a smaller wattage bulb, but 250-watt heat lamp bulbs are readily available, and that's really what I would recommend using. They fit into a safety mount that has a guard on the front, so that if it falls or comes in contact with something, it first of all won't break the bulb, but it also won't start a fire. You can indeed use a white light if you want to. The heat lamps are actually designed to produce and emit infrared radiation, which is really the warming radiation, and it's not totally visible to our naked eye, whereas the white light is more efficient at emitting cooler light. Both can warm your birds. The downside to the white light is that it's directly related to, well, it's not directly related to, it has a tendency to enhance the likelihood of your birds picking on each other. White light will often reflect sort of bright spots, and if a bright spot shows up on the back of a chick's head or anywhere on the chick, other chicks might feel compelled to pick it. And then, excuse me, and if the picking draws blood, then you've sort of got a free-for-all, and next thing you know, you witnessed chick cannibalism, which is something that I pretty much try to avoid. In the brooder, we have all kinds of rules about what the heat should be. The heat initially ought to be around 95 degrees, 2 inches off the floor. That doesn't have to be in the entire space. That really just has to be beneath the heat lamp. And then you can just use the chick's behavior to let you know whether they're comfortable or not. If the chicks are all clustered together, kind of piling on top of each other underneath the light, they're cold. And what you need to do is lower the lamp down a little bit further into the brooder. And if they're all, sort of organized in a donut around the lamp, then they're too hot, and you can raise the light. And the rule of thumb is to reduce the temperature at that 2 inches off the floor mark by about 5 degrees per week. You should do that till they're feathered out. I just sort of monitor them, as they require less and less heat, they tend to spread out further and further, and you can just raise the lamp up based on that. So that's essentially the essentials of a brooder. You do need one because they really do need to be kept warm when they're young. The feeders, you need to have some chick feeders available. That means they need to have low enough sides that the chicks can get at them. You need about 1.5 inches of feeder space per chick, and you can use linear troughs. You can also use round gravity flow chick feeders. And if your chicks are, or when your chicks are eating well, you should try to raise those feeders up, maybe set them on a brick to keep the birds from scratching their litter and doing other nasty things in their food trough, which they will do if you don't take some precautions. When I get brand new chicks, I start them typically by showing them feed in an inverted coffee can lid or some other shallow tray just for a day. I'll also sprinkle some feed on the litter so that as they're pecking around, they'll hopefully encounter some food. But very quickly they'll learn how to eat out of a feeder. You also need to provide clean water, and that's really important, and it needs to be clean. You really need to get yourself a chick waterer. A 1-quart waterer would handle up to 15 chicks, no problem. And these waterers, essentially, they look like plastic quart jars with a lid that screws onto them, and integral with the lid is a trough. And when you flip it upside down, you stand it on its head. Essentially, the water will dispense into the trough, and as the chicks drink it, it will keep filling the trough. You need to dip the bill of each one of your chicks into the water when you first receive the chicks to sort of show them where it is. And for brand new chicks especially, you want to put sufficient clean stones or marbles into the trough component of the waterer to keep them from falling in. It makes cleaning the waterer kind of a drag, but it will keep them safe for the first couple of days. It will keep them from drowning and getting too wet and chilled and whatnot. And then I can't stress this high enough, but you got to keep the water fresh and clean. If that means you change it 3 times a day, it's important to do that. As the chicks grow, again, like the feeder, you can set the water up on a platform above the litter so that they don't scratch litter into it as readily. And then finally, you need bedding, and the job of the bedding is to absorb liquid and manure. And to give the chicks a surface to scratch on. You can use newspaper, but you definitely don't want to use really slick papers because the chicks need to have traction or they'll develop with some leg deformities. But folks have pretty good luck with newspaper. I prefer hardwood shavings or ground corn cobs when I can get them. They work really well. They're absorbent and whatnot. Some folks use shredded leaves. I have used shredded leaves in the past, but you want to be sure that they're, as mold-free as you can possibly. You want them to be dry and you want them to be clean. I've also had good luck with shredded hay and or straw, and again, you don't want to have mold in there. And if you're worried about how to shred it, if it's a small space, you can break it up with your hands, or you can stick it in a 5-gallon bucket with a string trimmer. A lot of different ways to get the chunks short. And then finally, I just want to talk to you a little bit about how you might build yourself a brooder. It's really pretty easy. You can buy one for to $200 or more, but you can build one pretty straightforward here, and this will give you at least an idea of the various components. First of all, you need to have some enclosure, excuse me, for the birds, and you can use what I call a flexible ring. That there you just take a piece of rolled corrugated cardboard that's maybe about 18 inches tall, and build yourself a circle, maybe 5 feet in diameter, something like that. You could also use a cardboard box, which is shown here, to house the birds, and in this particular case we're looking at hardwood shavings. You could also use one of the plastic totes that seem to be ubiquitous these days, as long as it's got enough square footage. I think you'll be fine. I've also had good luck using 50-gallon galvanized or plastic stock tanks. They're about 2 feet tall, just shy of 4 feet long, and 2 feet wide, and they work pretty well too. And so essentially what you see here is an all recycled brooder that was made of a cardboard box. And in this particular case, the heat lamp is hanging from a cardboard girder that was made from one of the flaps that's placed across 2 other flaps. And a white light was used in this case for the sake of the photograph, because I really do prefer red lights myself. And then the small galvanized component that's in the middle of the brooder there is one of the chick feeders. That particular feeder does not have a jar on top, but that will take a jar. You can screw a jar to the middle section full of feed, and the chicks will eat out of the little holes that sort of are on the perimeter. And then in front of that is one of the 1-quart waterers that I was talking about. And then you know, that's really all you need. You want to be sure to have a means to rake and kind of sift through the bedding and replenish it and keep it clean. And I think at this point Rob's going to take over and tell you a little bit more about types of chicks and chickens and how you can feed them up right and keep them healthy.
Okay, well thanks Hank, appreciate it. If you consider chick type, they can be, I think, broadly divided into 2 categories, and we'll refine this a little bit more as we go through. But looking at the pullet type, frequently you know, a leghorn type bird, really built for egg production, and obviously female. The other would be the broiler type, who is built for meat production. The following graph is taken from the NRC, which is a National Research Council. It's a scientific body with oversight by a group of leading nutritionists and their respective fields, in this case poultry nutrition. But they put together the best thinking and then a review of the literature to indicate what the requirements for birds are in this case. And I just focusing on protein, looking at the differences between the pullet, or the egg type bird, and the broiler, or the meat type bird. You know, pullets are going to have a lower protein requirement. They have less muscle tissue relative to the broiler. They grow more slowly, and they eat less. As a result, they have a correspondingly lower protein requirement compared to the broiler. Conversely, broilers are much more muscular. They grow much more rapidly, and they have a higher requirement. If you look across, the graph should be relative on the side. If you look at the protein requirement for the pullet, 0 to 6 weeks, we're looking at 18%, and then gradually reducing as they approach maturity and egg production. The broiler certainly, if raised specifically for meat, has a shorter lifespan. We would start out with a relatively high level of protein at 23%, and then steps down as it approaches physical maturity and is ready for harvest. And I should note that these really are for production situations, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about selecting the proper feed. Many of you here probably aren't interested in maximum production and really pushing these birds. So we'll talk about opportunities to feed birds when they're not on such an aggressive schedule. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the dual purpose type birds and even the bantam type bird. The dual purpose certainly can be raised effectively either as pullets for egg production, as broilers for meat production, or a combination of the two. Bantams are typically raised for pleasure, so we'll talk about feeding them and some different considerations where maybe we're looking at more longevity than any specific production from these birds. Of course, we want all of our birds to lead long, healthy, and productive lives. To me, feeding for longevity means feeding a balanced diet for gradual, moderate, and sound growth and development. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the specific feeds. So selecting the right feed, you can learn a lot from a feed tag. There's a lot of information on there, and probably one of the most simple things to do is look for what's called the purpose statement. And typically this will appear right under the title of the product, and it's a quick way to see if you're on the right track, if what is given in that purpose statement matches up with the type of birds that you're going to be feeding. This is just an example of a product that we make, a chick grower developer, complete crumble, so it's complete and that it provides all the nutrition that the birds need, and is designed for growing chicks, like we're talking about this evening, and then also ducks and geese. It meets their nutrient requirements. There's a lot of additional information on feed tags. It talks about the guarantees for various nutrients, the ingredients contained within the feed, feeding directions, any other special considerations that need to be taken into account. Another thing to consider with feed is the form. Mash would be the first picture shown there on the left. It's also known as a meal feed sometimes, you'll hear it called. It's used really pretty extensively in commercial layers, less common I would say in bagged poultry feed that we would be a manufacturer of and many of you would be the consumers of. The mash feed is certainly suitable for birds of all ages and all sizes, given its particle size. The next picture there is the crumble. This is probably the most common form that you'll see in bagged poultry feed. It, like the mash, is suitable for all ages and sizes of birds. And then finally we have the pelleted feed. This is the material. It's mixed and then run through a piece of equipment called a pellet mill where the material is forced through a die to give it this shape. This is probably something you need to wait on. A young day-old chick is probably not going to be able to navigate and consume the pellets effectively. So this is really for birds that have a little bit of growth to them, and they'll get along just fine after they're, say, 6 to 8 weeks before we would introduce a pellet, depending somewhat on the breed and the size of that bird. Now, why would you prefer a pellet or a crumble versus, say, a mash feed? Believe it or not, these birds are going to have a good ability to sort and select different components out of that feed that they prefer, one over another, and they can even do that in the finely ground mash feed. So by pelletizing or crumbleizing the feeds, you reduce their ability to sort what's present in that feed. The other thing to consider is waste. Typically with a pelleted feed, you're going to have less waste than what you will see with a crumble. And with a crumble, you'll have less waste of the feed than you would see with a mash feed. So that's another consideration. And as Hank mentioned, having spilled feed around and things like that can be a harbor for insects. It's also an attractant to rodents and something that we'd like to avoid. It's also an economic waste many times if the material gets fouled where it gets mixed in with feces and things like that. The birds are certainly more reluctant to consume that. Selecting the right feed, pullets, it would be where we would start. Most chick starters are going to have in their feeding directions a suggestion to feed from 0 to 6 or 8 weeks of age. I know with our chick starter that there are a lot of folks who will feed it longer than that, really maybe 0 to 16 weeks from the time they get those chicks all the way up until they would make a conversion over to a layer type feed. And that's fine. There are different options that we'll talk about here, but that is a fairly common practice where people will start the chicks on a single feed and maintain that diet all the way until they switch to a layer type feed. And again, the way our product is formulated, that is a satisfactory way to feed those birds. The other option would be to feed the chick starter for the first 8 weeks, from the time they're the new chick up until 8 weeks of age, and then make a switch to a grower developer, which might have a slightly lower protein level, more similar to that maybe 16% as we showed on the graph a little bit earlier. There are also general purpose poultry feeds out there. MannaPro's most widely distributed general purpose poultry feed is called Triple Duty. It's an old name, it's been around for a long time, goes back to the days of Carnation when we're the successor company to the milling division of Carnation, and that's an old traditional name that's been in circulation for many years. But that would be another option, is to feed the chick starter for the first 8 weeks, switch to a grower developer, or even a general purpose poultry feed. Again, a little bit lower in protein, probably in that 16% range, and then feed that until the birds would be making the transition to the layer diet. If we consider the broilers, again, there are just a lot of options. If you think back to the graph that we looked at, the broilers will grow more rapidly if they're fed a higher protein diet. So you might look for something explicitly designed for the broiler that's going to be, you know, in that mid-20% range when it comes to the protein content. You could also feed some of these other feeds. The chick starter, for example, it's 18%. The birds will grow more slowly. It is, again, designed for the less muscular, slower growing pullet type bird, but this diet could certainly be fed to broilers. Again, they'll grow more slowly than their genetic potential, but they will grow and mature and develop into a meat type bird. And we'll talk about medicated feed in a little bit, but we do have both medicated and non-medicated chick starters. Our chick starter is medicated with amprolium, and I would consult with other tags if you're looking at other products, but I can tell you that there is no withdrawal period for our chick starter with the amprolium medication. So there's no concern with residue in the bird or anything like that. In fact, amprolium at the lower levels can actually be fed to broilers all the way through right up until they're harvested. It can even be fed to laying birds under situations where someone would choose to do that to control coccidiosis. And we'll talk more about medicated feed in just a moment. So the chick starter could be used for broilers, the grower developer, the general purpose poultry feed. Again, all these could be used to develop a broiler. The question is, if you just allow them to grow at a little more slower rate than if they were, you know, fed a higher protein diet. And you could select one of these feeds and feed it for the entire feeding cycle, or you could feed multiple feeds. Start out with the broiler feed or the chick starter, and then gradually, you know, change the diets of the birds, you know, as they approach maturity. For the dual-purpose bird, again, consider the purpose. Are they being fed for egg production later on, being fed for the meat-type bird, or some of both? Probably a good program here is to go with the chick starter for the first 8 weeks and then transition over to the grower developer or the general purpose poultry feed until they enter into egg production, which of course then you would switch to the layer. And finally, with the bantams, again, I think starting out with a chick starter, 0 to 8 weeks of age. Again, with the bantams, they're not commonly used or noted for their remarkable egg production nor for their meatiness. They're often fed and kept as ornamental birds for entertainment, for enjoyment, for free ranging, all the things that Hank discussed earlier. So I think a good gradual feeding program that met the needs of the bird but didn't push them too hard is really the order of the day on a bird like that. Just a few comments about all the different feeds out there. By design, layer feed is high in calcium, and that's necessary to support eggshell production. This will impair normal bone development in a young growing bird, so layer feed isn't suitable, is not a suitable diet for young growing chicks. Nor is scratch. Scratch can be a nice addition to the diet of older birds, but it's best to wait until they're maybe up to 8 weeks of age to introduce scratch into the diet. Again, it's not a complete feed. The grains are an excellent component to the diet, but in and of themselves, they're not nutritionally complete. And to get the birds off to the best start, a complete diet that has comprehensive fortification, contains all the nutrients, all the minerals, vitamins that the birds need, is really preferable to feeding scratch at that early age. There are a variety of supplements. Commonly, protein supplements are used, and these things are fine with a specific purpose in mind, what you're trying to achieve. Oyster shell and grit are things we commonly talk about in poultry nutrition, but again, not terribly important for the young growing chick. Oyster shell is a source of calcium. It's a rich source of calcium, again used by laying birds, not intended for chicks. They don't have that high calcium requirement that the layers do, so they don't need that until they enter into egg production. Similarly with grit is it's an insoluble material. I can describe what we have. It's an insoluble granite, crushed granite. It's not digested by the bird, but what it is used for is the birds pick these up, the material lodges in the gizzard, and it's used for particle size reduction. Chickens don't have teeth. They can't break down particles of the material they consume in a fashion like mammals can, so they need to have a mechanism to break down material into smaller, more digestible pieces, and the gizzard and then the insoluble material they consume is the action in which that's achieved. The muscular action of the gizzard, the abrasion between the grit that they pick up, and then the materials that they consume. Again, it's useful for older birds that are consuming coarse or even whole grains. Not really needed in the younger bird that's going to be fed a complete diet. If you consider the particle size of the mash or even the crumble or the pellet, of course it's been compressed into that form, but the particle size of the individual ingredients in there is quite small. And I'd say you could easily get by holding off on the grit until the birds get a little bit older, say in that 6 to 8 week range, again, when you might introduce scratch grains or other coarse or even whole grains into their diet. Free choice access to feed is usually the best, especially early on. Later in life, there may be a point where you might want to limit feed intake to maintain appropriate body condition in the birds, but this is something that does have to be managed. In group feeding situations, the more timid birds are going to get shorted in the group because if there's any kind of limitation to their feed, they're going to end up being the ones with the short end of the stick. Just, again, something that has to be managed. Just a quick word on feed intake, what you can expect. A pullet is going to consume about 15 pounds of feed before you'll get the first egg, and that's typical. There can be some plus and minus in that, but that would be typical for your white eggshell layers. Brown egg layers are going to consume a little bit more feed than that, a little less efficient, about 10% beyond that 15 pounds. For the broiler, that's being pushed, you look at about 10 pounds of intake per bird over a 7-week period. If they're grown rapidly and then harvested. That is an average. Typically the broiler types, males and females are fed together, and the males will eat 15 to 20% more. They'll also gain more than the females, but that's typical of the broiler type bird. The dual purpose meat birds, they'll eat a little bit more feed, grow a little more slowly, but it's going to be comparable to what we see here, just a little bit higher than say one of the Cornish rock crosses that's specifically geared toward meat production. Hank touched on water, and I concur totally. It's the most essential, really, of nutrients when it comes right down to it. You can't overstate the importance of water. It's involved in so many functions in the body, normal metabolism, digestion, temperature regulation, and purity and cleanliness are also important. No water or funky water leads to decreased feed intake. They're thirsty, appearance goes down, production goes down, and health suffers. So good, clean water, free choice all the time is the order of the day. Moving on into flock health and talking about some health considerations, really it just pays to be observant, just like you would with any animal enterprise. If you pay attention, you're more likely to see things early on when the need can be addressed and perhaps avoid a problem on a larger scale. So this is kind of a laundry list of things to look for. Different diseases have different symptoms and they manifest themselves in different ways. But these are just this is an example of a variety of symptoms that you can look for that could indicate there's something to be concerned about. Just general appearance and thrift. Do the birds not look well? Any kind of discharge from the nasal area, the eye, lesions or kind of a crustiness, labored breathing. In warm weather, birds aren't terribly efficient at cooling themselves. They will pant a little bit, and that's not talking about kind of a heat stress situation, but unusual labored breathing, when the animal's really having to work to take in oxygen. Trembling, swelling, blood where it hadn't ought to be, whether it's coming out, the nasal region or blood in the stool are all indicators that something is amiss. Paralysis or immobility, discoloration, primarily like the comb and the wattles, diarrhea, loss of appetite, isolation, odd behavior, and death. Birds that, if you have, mortality is not an unheard of thing when we're keeping any type of animal, but if it's an unusually high number, that's a good indication that there's an active infection or some kind of pathogenic event taking place that needs addressed. We've had a number of questions about vaccination, and I've done just a little bit of background work on this. Vaccination is an effective management tool used to prevent or decrease the adverse effect of specific diseases. One shot doesn't cover the birds for everything. Of course, it's disease specific. Merix is probably the best known and the most widely used vaccine. This is a viral disease, and Merix vaccination is typically recommended. And to have this done at the hatchery, birds that you're going to procure through the mail or at feed stores or whatever the source may be, it's say not universally known that Merix is going to be used, but it's fairly common, and I would certainly check with the source of the birds to check on the vaccine status here. Newcastle, another viral disease, given more occasionally, certainly less so than the Merix. It would be used more so where there's a history of the disease, where there's been an occurrence in the past. Kind of some of the other things that make vaccination for Newcastle clunky is that boosters are generally needed, beyond just at the chick stage. There are even some shipping restrictions, as I understand it, on birds that have been vaccinated with the Newcastle. So it's a little bit more complicated of a decision, but it is something I think that would be good to inquire about at the source where you're getting your birds. Infectious bronchitis is another viral disease where sometimes vaccination is given. Commonly, this is a vaccine that comes in combination with the Newcastle vaccine. So again, check with the source of your birds. Coccidiosis, and I found this very interesting. I wasn't familiar with this prior, specifically there being a vaccine used for coccidiosis. Again, it was of interest because these other conditions we've talked about, these other diseases are viral, And coccidiosis is different than that. It's a different type of pathogen. It's a protozoa. The vaccine itself is not as common, but some hatcheries do recommend that this be given. One caveat, I think, to using this, and certainly when you're vaccinating using medications, it's important to follow the directions that are given to a T. They're written for a very specific reason, and it's certainly advisable to closely follow those directions. In the case when the coccidiosis vaccine is given, it's recommended that those birds be fed a non-medicated starter, and I think specifically feeding a starter that does not have a coccidiostat like amprolium is, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. But again, I think it's very important if you choose to get the coccidiosis vaccine to follow that advice and feed a non-medicated starter in that case. Again, vaccines, there are others out there. It can be a challenge for the small flock. Vaccines are really, the way they're produced, they're designed for commercial production where thousands of birds are going to be vaccinated. But you do have options, and it is certainly something to consider. It's an important part of maintaining good flock health. There's a really good reference that came out of the University of Florida that we will send out to all the participants here tonight. The link to that I used quite a bit of the information from that in preparing this, and I think you'll find it very interesting and helpful in your operation there at home. Moving on to medications, amprolium. This is probably the most common medication that you're going to see in bagged chick starters. We've already made a little bit of reference to this, but amprolium is a coccidiostat. That is, it controls coccidiosis, which is a protozoa. It's a pathogen. That pathogen, coccidia, it's ubiquitous, really. It's very widespread in nature, and it's a legitimate threat to chicks. And amprolium is an effective way, an effective measure that can be taken to help control that condition in young growing chicks. You may see it fed in combination with other drugs or alone, but that is, I would say, the most widely used feed medication that you'll find in chick starters. A related compound is decoquinate. Decox would be the common name. It too is a coccidiostat, less commonly used, but you may see some of this in bagged chick starters. There are other medications that can be applied in feed, but they're not as common in bag. They're used more in commercial application, and I'm not going to go into those tonight. There are a number of antibiotics that are designed to be added with water. That's actually a pretty effective route to administer medication to birds when they break with a pathogen. Sometimes appetite is suppressed and they will quit eating before they quit drinking. So it is an opportunity to get medication, if it's needed, into their system if they've lost their appetite. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time going through any of these. Just know that there are several out there. The sulfonamides, these are sulfa drugs. Tetracycline, lincomycin, and spectinomycin are all antibiotics. Again, they're effective against specific pathogens. It's not like you can give this and it'll cure everything that ails the bird, but these are designed to address the most specific pathogens, many times bacterial organisms, that the birds are going to have to deal with. They're also effective in fighting these secondary infections that, say, if you have a viral outbreak of one condition or another, the bird's immune system is weakened. You can come in with one of these medications to keep some of the bacterial that are opportunistic that will try to infect the bird when they're down, kick them when they're down, so to speak, to stave off some of these other infections that could occur when their immune system is suppressed and working hard to fight off a primary infection. I've listed these because they're widely available in farm and feed stores and on online catalog companies. You can find these. Again, I can't stress enough, carefully follow the directions, observe the withdrawal periods if you're going to be harvesting animals or harvesting these birds or consuming eggs from them. Be sure you're aware of all the withdrawal periods associated with the use of these products. Just briefly on anthelmintics, simply stated, those are wormers. Piperazine is probably the most common. Again, follow the feeding directions carefully and observe the withdrawal period. Beyond the medication, just therapeutic nutrition, providing good, sound nutrition to these birds will help them, avoid some of these conditions in the first place. Good nutrition isn't medication, but good nutrition will help maintain a good, sound, healthy immune system. So, selecting a good complete feed and then supplementing. Calf Manna is a supplement that MannaPro has had. Again, it goes back to the carnation days, back to the 30s. It's been used for a variety of species, including a wide range of poultry species. A newer product we have is our poultry conditioner. This is really a complete poultry supplement. It's a good source of protein and amino acids, supplemental fat, has a complete mineral and vitamin pack, flaxseed meal, digestive aids, just a variety of things that really enhance or can improve the overall nutritional profile of any complete feed really that's being fed. So just kind of to close out on flock health, where do you get help? Well, your veterinarian is a good resource. They may not and likely are not specialists with poultry, but they are trained professionals. They've gone through a lot of schooling, a lot of education. They have a lot of experiences, and they have access to a variety of resources. So don't just say, well, my vet doesn't know anything about chicks. They may not, but they can be a very good resource, and don't overlook them. University extension. Each state has a land-grant university that has an agricultural component. Part of the agricultural school mission is extension or outreach, and that is having someone available to help with agricultural questions. And certainly, raising poultry falls under that umbrella. Books and guides and websites, like Hank mentioned, GRIT has numerous publications that are just invaluable that you can use to educate yourself and to learn more about raising birds. The USDA has a website. I've shown it there. There's a lot of information on there. They're especially interested in disease outbreaks and helping, identifying problem areas. There was a lot of interest a few years back about avian influenza, the bird flu. Periodically things like that will come up. It did not turn out to occur as perhaps thought could. That's not to say that there's not risks sometime down the road, but that is certainly a useful tool with information and helping in surveillance of disease conditions throughout the nation. And don't overlook the experience by your friends, your neighbors, other people that you come in contact with associated with raising these birds. Biosecurity, and I'd like to preface this by saying that keep in mind why you got these birds. If you enjoy taking your birds to shows or attending the shows yourself, going to swap meets, visiting and working with your neighbors who have birds, do it. That's why you got these birds. Don't feel that you have to undertake a siege type mentality to keep your birds healthy. That said, there are a number of common sense measures that you can follow to protect your flock, and certainly access. You may want to limit access to your birds from other people, especially other bird owners. Just the transmission of disease is a legitimate concern and one that you need to be aware of. And limiting access is certainly one of the safest ways to protect your birds. New additions, adding birds to the flock. We've had a number of questions about that. Again, that's a risk, but it's something that many people do, and get along just fine doing that. Going to shows, going to exhibitions, taking your birds to a show, and then returning. That there's a chance that there could be a pathogen present at the show that your bird could come home with. So just know that risk does exist. Mixing young and mature birds, again, introducing new birds to the flock, having young birds along with mature birds. Mature birds are much more seasoned, much more experienced. They've been exposed to more things, and as a result, they can transfer, they can shed pathogens that can be picked up by the younger birds whose immune systems are more naive than the older, more seasoned birds, so to speak. So that, it's a risk. Multiple species, keeping birds, other than chickens together, turkeys, ducks, geese, mixing the species. All these things are legitimate concerns. Again, my purpose in saying this isn't to send you screaming into the night, what did I get myself into? But just be aware that some of these things do accentuate the possibility that there could be, some disease problems. Something to keep in mind, especially with the shows and new birds, quarantine those birds. When you return from a show or you have new birds, keep them separated from the main flock it's typically recommended for 30 days just to observe them, to make sure that they don't break with some kind of illness that they might have picked up, either at the hatchery in the case of a new bird or through shipment, or at the feed store, people coming in buying chicks here and there who have chicks at home already. Disease can be passed that way. But quarantine them, keep them separate from the main flock for a period of 30 days just to watch and make sure that everything appears healthy. That's not to say that they weren't exposed to something and would shed a pathogen that they were exposed to that could be picked up by the others, but it is a good management practice to help limit that possibility. Traffic flow, and this really has to do with within your own place. If you do have birds separated by age, start out your day taking care of the youngest birds and move to the oldest. Again, it's got to do with what these birds have been exposed to. The younger birds are more naive from an immune status standpoint than the older birds. So start young, work your way to the old. If you do have birds in quarantine, start with your resident birds first and then move to the quarantine birds. So that's what I intended there by traffic flow. Vectors, and what I mean to imply here is the ways disease can be transmitted. And some are obvious, some maybe are less obvious, but certainly pests like rodents, other critters that go bump in the night, things that need to be controlled, they can transmit disease. Insects, parasites on the birds themselves. Hank mentioned wild birds, but maybe one less obvious is just your pets. Not that a condition that a dog might have would be contagious to chicks, but as he's out romping around through the neighborhood or through the countryside, he's running into any matter of things that he could pick up on his paws and bring home. So they're a vector that needs to be considered. Your clothing, your shoes, your hands, tires, if you've been in an area where there are other birds, all these things are means of transmitting disease. And finally, equipment, tools, crates, cages, shovels, hose, things like that you might be sharing. These are all vectors that can possibly transfer disease, and that's where sanitation becomes a very important consideration. Not only your facilities, your equipment, tools, keep all these things in mind. And just finally, to close it out with dead birds, despite your best efforts, death loss sometimes is just part of it. It does occur. It's not pleasant when it occurs, but if you're going to have some, you ultimately will lose some, very commonly. If not, you're very, very fortunate. But it shouldn't be totally unexpected if death loss does occur. Proper bird disposal is an important aspect of biosecurity. Certainly burial, deep enough, not just on the surface, but deep enough to where they're not going to be exhumed by said pet or other thing that might be out in the neighborhood or in the countryside. And not to be crass, but if you live on an acreage where you burn your trash, incineration is an appropriate means of disposing of dead birds should that occur. So just briefly in summary.
On that happy note.
Yeah. So again in summary, consider chick type and the purpose when you're selecting your feed. The most essential nutrient is something that no feed company can sell you. It's water, and really it needs to be managed such that the birds have free access to good, clean water at all the time. Be watchful for any indications of illness. Chance will favor you if you're prepared. So that's good counsel, I think, to just be very observant of the flock, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Have a comprehensive flock health plan in mind, including vaccination, medications, whether it's in the feed, the water, and maybe you don't use it all the time, but you have it on hand. You've got a packet of one of the sulfa drugs that's available that can be added to the water, because that's the kind of thing when you need it now. You don't need it in a couple of weeks or a few days when it might be delivered. So they're good things to have on hand. They're very stable, and it's good preparation to have those things available. An ounce of prevention, again, this has to do with the biosecurity, limiting access as appropriate for your operation, considering the vectors and controlling those, all the different things that we touched on here just a moment ago. And then continue your education. We're grateful for the opportunity to visit with you tonight. Hopefully everybody's been able to pick something up here that they can take away that's of use. But don't stop here. There's just a lot of information out there. We covered some of the things when we were talking specifically about flock health, but GRIT, the backyard guide to backyard chickens, is a really good resource, and the story publications that Hank alluded to, all very useful. So.
Great. Well, and thank you, Rob and Hank. And it's been pointed out to me by one of our webinar participants, Andy Schneider, the chicken whisperer himself, who's joined us tonight, that we did not mention his website, which is in fact very, very helpful and full of information. And we say that even though he's officially sponsored by our competition. But that website, which you'll want to visit, is chickenwhisperer.net. And in addition to a lot of useful written information there, you can also find a link to his very, very popular radio program. So you'll definitely want to check that out. Okay, I'm going to give our presenters a chance to catch their breath and look over the questions we've gotten. As I mentioned up front, we're going to try to answer the most common questions. And I'm going to mention a couple of other things to you while they're doing that. Tomorrow you will receive an email from us thanking you for attending the webinar, and it will include 3 different links. The first will be to a survey. We'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's webinar so that we can do an even better job next time. We also have several topics we'd like you to respond to in terms of future webinar topics. So your input there would be greatly appreciated. You'll also find a link to a $5 coupon that you can use for any MannaPro product sold around the country, and a link that you can follow to redeem your free issue of Grit magazine. If you have, I mentioned up front that we're going to put together a piece that answers all of the questions that we got tonight, since we won't be able to answer them on the call tonight. But if you have additional questions, you can email me, jenniferh@mannapro.com, anytime, and I will be more than happy to answer all of your questions. You can also check us out at MannaPro.com or at Grit.com. We have several Facebook fan pages. You can become a fan of Calf Manna, MannaPro Horse Treats if you have a horse, Grit Magazine, or Mother Earth News, their sister publication, all providing great information not just on chickens but on rural living and other topics that will interest you. I finally want to mention that we are MannaPro is currently running a baby animal photo contest. So when those chicks have arrived, if they haven't already, and you want to take a photo of them or any other baby animals on your farm this spring, you want to send those photos to us. You can go to our website and get all the details, the rules, where to send the photos. All entries will receive a free magnetic photo frame just for entering, and then we'll be giving away thousands in prizes as well. Okay, let's give away some prizes tonight to thank you all for attending. We have a great selection of fun prizes that we'll be mailing out to everyone after the webinar tomorrow. First of all, I'd like to give 5 MannaPro caps to 5 lucky winners. And let's see who those winners are. All right, Catherine Gordon, Corey Felt, Gordon Neeson, Lily Nestor, and Lisa Glennie are all going to be receiving a free MannaPro cap after tonight's webinar. All right, next we'll give away 5 bags of MannaPro Chick Starter. Dr. Rob talked about that tonight. And those winners, this is really great. You can see we have people participating from all across the country. Judy Grace, Amy Sirk, Arlene Joyce, Cassandra Dickerson, and Scott Russo. Congratulations. Next, Grit has generously given us 5 Grit caps to give away tonight. And our lucky winners there are Jeff Schmidt, Terry Van Buskirk, Paul Miller, Uldis Stulpen, and Sarah Belmont. And Grit has also generously donated to our prize pool 10 Grit Guide to Raising Backyard Chickens, which is a fantastic publication, just brand new this spring. And our lucky winners there, oops, oh man, there we go. Angie Nost, Alexandria Maurer, Alan LeBlanc, Angela Munyon, Rebecca Spencer, Joe Silva, Diana Dellinger, Charles Baker, Tammy Johnson, and Deborah Allen. We have 5 Grit totes. They look very green. Very eco-friendly. And our winners there are Karen Skouras, Jennifer Honiaki, oh no, darn, Jennifer Etheridge, Stephen Ross, Teresa Copeland, and Jocelyn Reynolds. All right, our last 2 prizes. The folks that publish Grit magazine also publish the Farmer's Almanac, so we have 1 free Farmer's Almanac to give away. And our lucky winner there is Lynn Koch from Carbondale, Illinois. Congratulations, Lynn. And MannaPro is donating a 5-gallon waterer for your chicks. As Rob mentioned, the most important thing, water. And our lucky winner there is Debbie Hawkins from Arizona. Congratulations, Debbie. Okay. Let's dig into the questions. Rob, are you ready with some of the more commonly asked questions?
You bet. Should you add sugar or a vitamin to the water for chicks? Sugar could be used. It's a good energy source, but you would want to limit that, I would say, pretty closely. The reason is it's a very soluble carbohydrate, could lead to looseness or diarrhea in the chicks. So if you were going to use it, I would use it very sparingly. There are a variety of vitamin preparations. We don't actually make any, but there are water-soluble vitamin packs that can be added to the water. I think that's a good addition, especially in any period of stress for new chicks, day-olds that are just arriving. It'll help get them off to a good start. Certainly vitamin nutrition is an important component to the overall diet, so that would certainly work. Can I breed the Cornish rock crosses, the broilers, for eggs, and what kind of feed do I feed them? You would feed, I would say, make sure I understand here. same type of feed. Whether if you wanted to move toward egg production, you could feed them the pullet type feed developed in that way. The egg type, the leghorn type, certainly will be more prolific egg layers than this cross might be. There's even, I think, potentially some reduced fertility that you might see in some of these meat birds with that type of cross. But a consideration that you might want to look into. I'd like to raise a combination of meat and egg chickens. At what age do I need to separate the eggers from the meat chicks? I'd say you can keep them together until the meat birds are harvested, say at 6 to 8 weeks. You could keep them together for that period of time, but watch for any kind of social issues that might occur within the flock. But I would expect you could do that without any difficulty. If I wanted to be able to harvest 1 chicken per day for consumption, how large would my flock have to be in order for that to be sustainable? It'll be a little challenging in that genetically the birds are going to be maturing roughly at the same rate, and it's really not practical to get birds in multiple shipments and multiple ages, I would say. An opportunity, certainly fresh meat is wonderful, but you may be looking at a situation where you get chicks a couple of different times and harvest a group at one time and then freeze those birds. There would certainly be some challenges to that. You could perhaps have 3 to 5 hens along with a rooster where you're getting fertilized eggs, and then you could take those eggs out and incubate them. Certainly it could be done, but from a practical standpoint it would be challenging, but not impossible, but it would have its challenges. Is it possible to start out with a flock as small as 2 hens? Sure. There wouldn't be any limitation. You have the 2. It allows for a little social interaction that way, so I think 2 is a fine place to start. If that makes sense for you, if that produces the number of eggs you're looking for on a weekly basis, that's absolutely fine. At what age do chickens stop laying eggs? Well, they'll begin usually at 18 or 20 weeks of age. They'll typically lay for a year, a little longer than a year. Molting, which you may be familiar with, which is a natural shedding of the feathers and kind of a rejuvenation period in the birds. You would, excuse me, after that molt period, which is roughly an 8-week period where they regrow their feathers, they would enter a second laying period. But again, in that first lay after they mature, 12 to 15 months probably in egg production, and as egg production, as the laying cycle gets longer, their egg production is going to reduce from say 90% maybe down to 50 as they approach the end of that cycle. So then they would be molted and potentially, and you could get another laying period of a similar time frame out of the birds at that point. The vaccines we talked about, are these given only to baby chicks, or can older chickens be vaccinated? Again, it's best to follow the directions on that. The Merrick's vaccine, which is the most common, is given to babies, newborn chicks, day-old chicks. As far as older chickens, there are some vaccines, and again, we'll send out the email with that site that talks a lot about vaccination. Some of them are older birds, maybe 4 to 6 weeks for some of the specific vaccines, and then some of the vaccines recommend annual boosters. Of course, those would be aged birds. At what age can you start giving treats, such as worms, crickets, fruits and vegetable scraps, that kind of thing? I'd say let the birds get off to a good start, say 6 to 8 weeks of age. When they're off to a good start, their development is well underway. Then introducing some of these other things. And I think it's important also to mention that these treats and supplements should really be used as supplements to the base diet and not really replacements for the nutrition that you're going to find in a complete feed. Medicated versus non-medicated, how many chicks validate feeding them medicated? I
think the question there is, do you make the decision on medicated versus non-medicated feed based on the size of your flock or on other criteria? And I think you have a point of view on the use of medication and the safety, how safe that is.
Yeah, if you have a very sanitary operation where you don't have some of these biosecurity risks where you're bringing in new birds, you don't really interact with other bird owners, where it's unlikely that you're going to introduce disease from another flock, probably the non-medicated feed would be fine. Again, coccidia stats like amprolium are very effective. Coccidia is widespread and can be controlled very effectively by feeding, a feed that does contain amprolium, at least for the first several weeks when these birds are most at risk, say up to the first 8 weeks of life. Feeding that will, certainly help reduce in death loss should you have a
well, and I know we've talked about this, Rob, in the past when we introduced this product, but can you talk about the low level of medication, at least in the MannaPro Chick Starter, and how it doesn't, and what the interaction is with meat or egg production and all that?
Right, yeah, there's a range that can be included in the feed, and we are at the lower end of that range. Again, these, the drug sponsors, the makers of the drugs, have to go through FDA approval and show, looking for residues in both meat and tissue and eggs and things of that nature, and have to show that the residue does not occur. And using the level of amprolium we don't have the withdrawal, so there isn't really concern of carryover of the medication into the tissue or into the eggs. As you feed medicated feeds or look at medicated feeds or use a medication in the water, again, it will be, if there is a withdrawal, it will be very explicitly written out and indicated on the packaging very prominently. And if the label is silent in terms of anything about a withdrawal, that means there is none.
Thanks, Rob.
Let's see. How much does a free-ranging chicken tend to reduce the amount of feed, like in the summertime? Depends on their access and how foraged down the particular yard that you might be keeping them in. But I would say that feed intake of a commercially prepared feed or layer feed, whatever the case may be, could be reduced by as much as 50%. If they've got good access to a lot of material in the range setting that they might be in. That's variable, but I would say that would be on the upper end. If they've got plenty to eat outside of their normal diet, that it could be cut in half. What do I feed my chicken so that I get the omega-3 eggs and organic chicken eggs? Organic has some very specific definitions that that encourage you to get further information on. The omega-3 in particular, that's achieved commonly by feeding flaxseed. Flaxseed is an oil seed that's commonly grown in northern parts of the U.S. and into Canada. It's a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids, and hens that are fed this feed stuff will actually deposit these omega-3 fatty acids into their egg yolk at a relatively higher rate. what makes your feed better than others. But certainly there are a lot of good feeds out there, and I'm not going to disparage the other companies. I don't know their formulations, but I do know what ours are, and they include quality ingredients. As a company, MannaPro has been at it for a number of years. Go back to the Carnation days and even before then into the mid-1800s. So we have a lot of experience and a lot of track record in providing good quality products. An applied understanding, I think, of nutrition, not just for poultry, but for a variety of animal species that we deal with. We've got a very sound quality assurance program. National distribution would be another consideration. We're not the biggest feed company out there, but we have a pretty wide reach, and hopefully could meet your needs in most places that you folks reside. So.
All right. Can I lay some questions on Hank? Hank,
sure.
Are you still there?
I am.
Okay. We had a lot of questions about the brooder.
Okay.
One that got asked repeatedly was how long are chicks kept in the brooder?
Oh, that's a great question. My rule of thumb is really until they're fully fledged. That means they've got good wing feathers. Their body's covered with feathers, no more of the sort of the fluffy down, and the days are minimally 70 degrees, and nights minimally in the 60s. And even then, I might offer a lamp for them to get through the nights, at least initially. So I'm thinking, if those birds are 12 weeks old, they're going to do just fine outside, or outside of the brooder.
All right. Do you need a perch in the brooder for them?
No, you do not. Ideally, you'll have them out of the brooder by the time the perching behavior is really underway. I mean, certainly if you've got a high enough sided brooder, there's no harm to setting a low perch or two in there, but you want to be sure that they can't work their way up the perch and then get into harm.
Is it necessary to increase the brooder size as the chicks grow, but before they can go outdoors into the coop?
The answer to that question really is how big the brooder was initially.
Right.
I know that sounds really, and I don't mean that to sound trite at all. But let me, there's so many. Again, rules of thumb out there.
Well, I guess that maybe you could answer this then, Chick, Hank, because one of the other questions was how much space per chick in the brooder. So if you want to start out with a brooder that'll last you until they go to the coop, how big should you build that brooder? Or maybe
yeah, so you need roughly 1 square foot per 8 chicks, more or less at the beginning. That leaves them lots of space. More space is always good. So if you could get 8 chicks per square foot when they're young, by 6 weeks of age, you'll need at least probably 2. You'll need a square foot for every 2 chicks, and again, this depends on the breed. So if you were say you built a brooder that was 4 square feet, you could probably handle more chicks than you really want because you could get them through the brooding. You could get 8 chicks easily through the brooding.
Okay. Do hen-raised chicks need the heat lamp?
Nope, they surely don't. The hen does all that for you.
Is the temperature requirement, I think now we're back in the brooder, is the temperature requirement the same for ducks as it is for chicks?
Oh gosh, I'd have to actually look that up. It's darn close if it's not identical.
Yeah.
Huh?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
We can look that up. Steve Doty says yes, that it is.
Yeah,
so
and
like you're saying, it's probably very close.
And for everybody out there, I would say if you're using a brooder with a lamp, don't bother with a thermometer. You'll just obsess. Just watch watch the behavior of those chicks. If they cluster under it, it's too cold, and if they get as far away from it as they can, it's too hot. And you just raise or lower the lamp. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How deep should the bedding be?
I'll usually start out with about 1 inch. And often I'll just let that build up. If it's good and dry still, and it's drying up their manure, I'll just add more to the top, and they'll scratch it through, and you'll wind up with a really sort of dry compost at the end. If it's wet, I'll clean it out and replenish it.
Okay.
And maximum 2 inches if it packs pretty well.
Okay. One of the things we got a lot of questions on is introducing new birds to an established flock.
Yeah.
And related but separate, mixing chicken breeds or different types of chickens, bantams with other types of hens. And I know you have experience and some advice on that.
Sure. There are all kinds of horror stories about introducing young birds into an established flock, and I think, I do it every year, and really all I do is I just ensure that there's tons and tons of space in the chicken yard and plenty of areas of cover, so there's shrubbery and tall grass and whatnot. And I'll slip the new birds in at night, not into the chicken house, but into the yard. And you just sort of monitor it relatively carefully, and I've actually never had a kill that way. So I would just say, do it, but do it carefully. Try to slip your new birds in at night. If you want to put them into the house, go ahead and put them into the house at night if your birds are locked up into the house every night. With regard to mixing chicken breeds, no problem typically at all. No problem, especially if they're raised together. I've had some difficulty with some orphan, or I should say discarded, whatever, inherited bantams that I introduced to my flock, and in one case was a pair were actually raised with a flock of regular birds or standard-sized birds. And ultimately, my dominant rooster killed both of them. They were both young roosters. So I mean, and that was just simply a size. The bantams didn't. They were basically cockfighting and lost. So I think probably if there's likely to be a problem, that you'll potentially have a problem with very small birds and more aggressive standard-sized birds.
Okay.
I also keep a few turkeys, which is not a recommended practice at all, but I keep a set of rare turkeys in with a set of my rarest chickens, and they pretty much ignore each other.
Okay. A couple random things. Does using chicken manure as fertilizer for a home garden cause diseases, or does it need to be turned into compost first? If composting is required, how long does it need to cook, so to speak, before it is safe to use?
I never worry about chicken manure causing disease. I'll work it into the. I have a heavily mulched garden, and I'll work it into the top couple of inches of mulch as a side dressing if it's relatively fresh. But I really enjoy composting it, and I'll usually, I'll build a compost pile throughout a growing season, and then start a new pile, and I'll use the pile that I finished the following season. So I'm probably fairly laissez-faire. I don't take the temperature of my compost. I just sort of know when it's done. It's odor-free, rich, and very friable. And that I'll go ahead and apply directly, at the base of the plants. I don't mind if it contacts the plants, and I'll let my asparagus grow up through that and all of that.
Okay. This is really not exactly about chicks, but we got a couple of them. So how should I clean the eggs after I harvest them before putting them in the fridge? And there were a couple in the similar vein.
Yeah, there's a whole school of thought that says don't bother cleaning them because you'll contaminate the eggs more. I'm sort of compulsive about cleaning things, so typically what I do is just you want the cleaning solution to be warmer than the egg, because then the air cell in the egg will expand a little bit, and you'll have a tendency to push things out through the pores instead of draw things in through the pores. And I'll just run them under the sink and rub them clean with my finger. There are some some solvents or cleaners, disinfectants that you can purchase. Tektrol, I think, is one trade name that's fairly widely used. And you can mix up a solution of that at the appropriate temperature, again, warmer than what the eggs are currently, and dunk them. You might give them a little agitation. And then just simply let them air dry, and then I pop them into clean containers and into the fridge.
Okay.
Or the incubator.
Right. Okay. Well, I think, do you have a couple more, Rob, and then we probably ought to...
There's a few more, yeah. Are there any safe antibiotics to give to laying hens when they have a cold? Aureomycin is the trade name for a chlorotetracycline. It is a tetracycline that I talked about a little bit ago. It's available both in a water-soluble form and also in a feed form, what are called 4-gram medicated crumbles that can be mixed in with a non-medicated layer feed to provide that. There is no withdrawal period for chickens. Again, follow the label directions closely, but it's explicitly available for chickens to control chronic respiratory disease, which may very well be what you're dealing with when you talk about them having a cold. Do you put terramycin in the water? Yeah, terramycin is also a tetracycline. It's oxytetracycline, but yes, you can. It is available in a soluble form that can be added to water to address specific disease conditions. Why doesn't your ingredient list tell what the feed is made of? Can you provide which grains and substances? That's a good question, and maybe the topic for a webinar down the road, but I'll go ahead and speak about it here. What you'll see on there is an example of the use of collective terms, and where you see grain products, plant protein products, processed grain byproducts. And we're not out to dupe anyone or fool anyone or keep any big secrets, but by using those collective terms, what that allows us to do is to use packaging at all of our plants across the country. For instance, in Florida, rice bran, or rice mill feed is a common ingredient that's used in a variety of feeds, not always poultry feeds, but in a variety of feeds. Economically, it's not something that you're going to find in the upper Midwest because rice is grown in the southeast and rice is grown on the West Coast. Ingredients from feedstuffs that are grown in those local regions are going to be certainly more prevalent. And by saying processed grain byproducts, we can use that rice bran or that rice mill feed in Florida, but we don't have to. If we were to say that explicitly on the package, rice bran, then we would have to use the rice bran in facilities that wouldn't customarily handle that type of ingredient. So anyway, that's why it's done. If you had specific questions, please feel free to shoot us a message. We're happy to address the questions that you have regarding specific feeds. But that's an example of a collective term versus a specific term. Is grit or oyster shell needed for free range? It depends on the diet and the production. Like a layer certainly could benefit from oyster shell if they were consuming a diet that was limited in its calcium content. A free-ranging bird that has access to a layer feed but is getting a good bit of its intake from what it's foraging. What it's foraging is probably not a very rich source of calcium, so they would probably benefit from the oyster shell. The grit, if it's kind of a pastoral setting where it's mostly sod, there's not a lot of rock that could be picked up, or small pebbles and sand and things like that could be used, then the grit could benefit those birds if they're not going to have access to it in the yard, so to speak.
All right. Great. Well, By no means did we answer all of the questions, but I think we did hit the top questions. Again, I'll reiterate our promise to send something out that attempts to answer even more and all of them within the next few days when we can get ourselves collected and answer those. The participation's been phenomenal, and the number of questions has certainly given me a sense of what some future webinars topics might make sense. So please do fill out the survey that you receive tomorrow by email. It will definitely help us to plan for future sessions like this one and to continue to improve and offer you programs and information that's useful to you. Hank, thank you very much, and Rob as well. Steve, also who works with Rob, very helpful in answering the questions. I appreciate your dedication tonight, and thanks, and especially thanks to all the Lost fans. I think we lost a couple people before I started, but thanks for recording that and sticking with us tonight. Everyone have a great night, and we'll talk with you soon. Thank you.